She hasn't, no. She's more of a soft influencing.
I will deal with her. Everyone in that room understood exactly what those 4 words meant. Not because William raised his voice. Not because he made any dramatic declaration. But because quiet fury from a man who has been patient for 30 years lands differently than shouting. It lands like a verdict. September 2022. A quiet room. A desk covered in documents. And a man who had been waiting for this moment longer than most people knew. When Prince William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, the world watched the formal handover and saw what they were supposed to see. A ceremonial transfer. A title passing from father to son. Something ancient and procedural and almost boring in its formality. That is what the cameras showed. That is what the headlines said. What happened behind that door was something else entirely. The Duchy of Cornwall is not a decoration. It is not a symbolic honor handed down through generations to make royals feel important. It is a machine. A living, breathing financial machine worth over $1 billion, generating millions every single year, controlling a vast network of properties stretching across Cornwall, Wales, and the Isles of Scilly. It funds the heir to the throne. It employs hundreds of people. It holds contracts, payrolls, budgets, and arrangements that have been quietly running for decades without anyone from the outside world asking too many questions. The moment Charles became king, all of it transferred to William's hands. The properties, the income, the contracts, the payroll. William went through that payroll the way a man goes through a house he has just inherited and is seeing clearly for the first time. Methodically, carefully.
This has been very inspiring, a lot of incredible finalists, a lot of optimism and action and really hope. You've been in the 5 years, this is a 10-year action project. I mean, I think you've sorted through thousands and thousands of finalists, you've got hundreds of partners, and apparently 75 actual solutions. What have these tangible efforts done, and are you satisfied with the progress so far midway?
With the particular attention of someone who already suspects what they're going to find. And then he found it. One name. Sitting right there on the page. Collecting payments year after year after year as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if no one would ever look closely enough to ask how it got there in the first place. Annabelle Elliot. Camilla's youngest sister. William looked up from that document. He turned to his staff. And he said, very quietly, just 4 words. Hi viewers, I want to ask you something personal before we go any further. Did you ever watch someone you loved get hurt and feel completely powerless to do anything about it? To the outside world, Annabelle Elliot was entirely respectable. She was polished. She was connected. She was the kind of woman who appeared in the royal box at Wimbledon and smiled warmly at BBC cameras and sat beside senior members of the family as if she had always belonged there. In 2014, a major British newspaper ranked her the 5th most influential female interior designer in the entire country. 5th in the whole country. She had designed spaces inside duchy properties across Cornwall, Wales, and the Isles of Scilly. She had been woven so deeply into the fabric of palace life that most people had completely stopped questioning how she got there. William never stopped questioning it. Because William knew exactly how Annabelle Elliot ended up on that payroll. He knew what she had done to earn it. He knew what she had looked away from. He knew what she had actively helped to happen. And he knew that the contract she had been handed in 2005, right after Charles married Camilla, was not a reward for her talent. It was a reward for her loyalty. Not to the crown. To her sister. The last numbers visible before William took control told a partial story. Nearly £20,000 in fees. Over £12,000 in furniture purchases. But those were only the final visible figures. The full total across nearly 2 decades was never fully disclosed. Someone had made certain of that. The money was not what tightened William's jaw, though. It was what that money represented.
Christian, I think it's days like today that there's a chance for a bit of a reflection as to, I can't quite believe we are the halfway mark of the 10-year plan of the decade of change that Earthshot was there for. I'm so pleased and impressed by what the Earthshot's achieved, but most of all by the finalists, the winners, and all the Earthshot community that are out here. They've risen to the challenge.
It was the fact that the institution he was now responsible for had been quietly paying a woman who had helped cover one of the most devastating betrayals his family had ever experienced. Year after year, invoice after invoice. As if what she had done simply did not matter. As if history had no cost. The 2024 Duchy of Cornwall annual report came out, and where Annabelle Elliot's name had appeared for nearly 20 years, there was now a single word. Nothing. No press release. No gracious farewell. No acknowledgement of 2 decades of service. Palace sources tried to soften it afterward, telling the press it was no reflection on the quality of her work. But that statement was for public consumption. William's reasons had nothing to do with the quality of her interior design. It was 3 things moving together at exactly the same moment. It was his vision for a monarchy that no longer handed out paychecks based on who you were connected to. It was a direct message to every person inside Camilla's circle that the protection they had enjoyed under Charles was finished. Done. Non-negotiable. And it was personal. Bone-deep personal. Because to understand why William did not hesitate, why there was no internal debate, no sleepless night, no moment of second-guessing, you have to understand what Annabelle Elliot actually did. Not what she designed. Not what she decorated. What she did during the years when 2 people were conducting an affair that was quietly pulling Diana apart at the seams. Annabelle Elliot did not simply turn away and pretend not to notice. That would have been bad enough. What she did was far more deliberate than that. She opened her home. Her country house in Dorset became one of the locations Charles and Camilla used for their secret meetings during the affair years. While Diana was at home raising 2 small boys and fighting to hold herself together, Charles was making his way quietly to Annabelle's house. And Annabelle was not standing at the door looking uncomfortable about it. She was part of it. There was one particular evening during those years. Charles arrived furious. Something had happened, something involving Diana, and he had brought every ounce of that anger straight through Annabelle's front door. He was difficult. He was snapping at people. Even Camilla could not reach him. And in that moment, Annabelle Elliot did not step back. She stepped forward. She grabbed her sister by the shoulders. She looked her directly in the eyes. And she said it plainly. Diana doesn't even come close to you. Go calm him. Then she pushed Camilla toward the bedroom door. And closed it behind her. That was the woman William had been paying for 20 years. That was the woman sitting in the royal box at Wimbledon. That was the woman smiling into BBC cameras in 2023, still on his payroll, calling Camilla completely loyal. Saying it with warmth. Saying it with a straight face. Saying it as if loyalty were the word that belonged anywhere near what had been done to his mother.
This, man attacked me, and I did fight back, and I got off. I remember getting off the train, and my mother looking at me and saying, you know, why's your hair standing on end, and why's the button, missing from your coat? And
oh gosh, so it was physical.
I'd been attacked, but I remember anger, and I was so furious about it.
Something settled inside William when he saw that interview. Something that had already been decided became absolutely certain. And when the 2024 annual report came out with that single word where her name used to be, it was not the end of the story. It was the opening move. There was a house in Dorset that most people never heard of. A private country home. Quiet roads leading up to it. Trees. Space. The kind of place designed to keep the outside world exactly where it belonged, outside. From the road, you would never have known what was happening inside it. You would never have guessed what that house was being used for. What arrangements had been made within those walls? What conversations had taken place in those rooms? And what a woman named Annabelle Elliot had chosen to become inside them. Because Annabelle Elliot's home in Dorset was not simply a gathering place for old friends. It was something far more deliberate than that. During the years when Charles and Camilla were conducting their affair, that house became one of their primary meeting locations. A safe house. A place where the rules that applied everywhere else simply did not apply. Where a future king could arrive unannounced and leave without anyone saying a word about it. Diana was not there. Diana was never there. Diana was at home. With her boys. Trying to hold herself together while the man she had married continued to disappear into a world she was never invited into. Think about what that means for a moment. Really sit with it. While Diana was raising William and Harry, fighting through the darkest period of her life, telling herself that the marriage could be saved, that she was imagining things, that she was being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Charles was quietly making his way to her sister-in-law's house in the Dorset countryside. And the woman who owned that house was not standing at the door with any visible conflict about it. Annabelle Elliot knew exactly what her home was being used for. She knew exactly who was walking through her front door and why. She knew what was happening inside her walls, and she made a choice. Not once. Not reluctantly. Repeatedly. Over years. But there was one evening in particular. One evening that tells you everything you need to know about who Annabelle Elliot really was beneath the polished exterior and the Wimbledon appearances and the warm BBC smile. Charles arrived that night in a state nobody could reach. Something involving Diana had set him off, and he had carried every bit of that anger straight through the front door with him. He was difficult. He was distant. He was the kind of furious that fills a room without a single word being raised. People around him were walking carefully. Even Camilla, who knew him better than almost anyone, could not get through to him. And then Annabelle moved. She did not step back. She did not give him space or suggest that perhaps the evening was not a good time. She walked directly to her sister. She put her hands on Camilla's shoulders. She looked her in the eyes. And she said it simply, without hesitation, without a trace of doubt. Diana doesn't even come close to you. Go calm him. Then she turned Camilla toward the bedroom door. And she closed it behind her. Her hands. Her bedroom. Her decision. That was not a woman caught in an uncomfortable situation. That was a woman making a deliberate choice about whose side she was on and what she was willing to do to help. She did not simply tolerate what was happening in her home. She actively managed it. She coached it. She pushed it through the door with her own two hands and then went back to the rest of her evening. And Diana never knew. Diana was home with two small children, believing that the worst had already passed, while her husband was in Annabelle Elliot's bedroom and Annabelle Elliot was on the other side of the door, having chosen Camilla over everything. Years passed. Diana died. Charles married Camilla. And within the same year, Annabelle Elliot walked straight into a duchy contract managing interior design across some of the most significant royal properties in Britain. The timing was not coincidental. The reward was not subtle. And for nearly 2 decades, the payments kept coming. Then came 2023. And Annabelle made the kind of move that tells you she either had no idea what William was feeling or she had decided it did not matter. She sat down in front of a camera for a BBC documentary celebrating Charles and Camilla's coronation year. She was still on William's payroll at the time. She was still receiving her duchy payments. And she looked directly into the lens and said about Camilla, she is his rock. She is somebody who is completely loyal. Completely loyal. Completely loyal. The woman who had pushed her sister through a bedroom door while Diana was home falling apart was sitting on national television and using the word loyal as if it belonged to Camilla. As if loyalty was something Camilla understood. As if the entire architecture of what had been done to Diana could be reframed with a warm smile and a single carefully chosen word. William saw that interview. He was still signing her checks when he saw it. And something that had already been decided became absolutely irreversible. The 2024 Duchy of Cornwall annual report came out shortly after. Annabelle Elliot's name, which had appeared in those pages for close to 20 years, was simply gone. No transition. No tribute. No gracious acknowledgement of service. Palace sources murmured that it was no reflection on her work. But the real reason had nothing to do with her work, and everyone paying attention knew it. 20 years. One word. Finished. But Annabelle's removal was only the surface layer of what William was unraveling. Because underneath Annabelle's story was a story older and darker and far more calculated than most people had ever been allowed to see. And it began not in Dorset. Not in a palace. But in the mind of a woman who had decided, years before Diana ever entered the picture, exactly how she intended to arrange the world around her. 1993. Britain. A November morning. William was 11 years old. He did not learn what his father had done from his father. He did not sit down for a careful conversation. He did not receive an explanation or an apology or even an acknowledgement. He picked up a newspaper. The same newspapers that millions of strangers across Britain were reading that morning. And he read the transcript of a secretly recorded phone call between Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, a call that had been made 4 years earlier in 1989, when both of them were still married to other people. He read every word. The call had everything in it. The intimacy. The planning. The laughter. The discussion of which friends would lie for them, which homes would be used, which members of their social circle could be trusted to cover their tracks. Annabelle's home was on that list. William read that too. But beyond all of it, beyond every uncomfortable detail, there was something worse. The affair in that phone call had already been running for years. Since at least 1980. Before Diana. Before the engagement. Before the wedding. Before William was born. Before any of it. Which meant that everything Diana had been told about the past being in the past had been told to her while the past was still very much the present. 11 years old. Reading that in a newspaper. Understanding every word. That is not a child learning something difficult. That is a child watching his entire understanding of his own life rewrite itself in real time. Every memory he had of his mother's sadness, every moment he had seen her lost or withdrawn or quietly falling apart, suddenly had a name. A cause. A person. And that person was still in the picture. Now here is the detail that changes everything.
And I think we've challenged them at every turn to be bolder, be better, be ambitious, reach for the stars. The Earthshot's job around that is to really be the glue that holds it all together. And I think when we first started talking about this as a concept, optimism was the key word we always wanted to use, because as you saw on the screen here, urgency and optimism equal action. And there's an awful lot of pessimism going around. And I think you can feel today that the positivity.
The detail that most people, even those who followed the Diana story closely, either do not know or have never fully absorbed. Camilla did not simply begin an affair with Charles after he married Diana. According to Richard Parker Bowles, Andrew's own brother, Camilla had actively helped point Charles toward Diana in the first place. Not because she thought Diana was right for him. Not out of any genuine concern for Charles's future. But because she looked at Diana and saw something she could use. Richard Parker Bowles said it plainly. Camilla believed Diana was naive and easy to manage. She knew that her own history, her own reputation, the very nature of what she and Charles had already been to each other, made her completely unacceptable as a royal bride. The palace would never allow it. So she found a solution. She helped direct Charles toward a young woman who, in Camilla's calculation, would not ask too many questions. Diana was partly chosen by Camilla as a cover. Let that settle. Diana was not simply the woman Charles married before eventually choosing Camilla. She was, in a very real and documented sense, selected by Camilla because Camilla believed she could survive her. Because Camilla looked at a young, trusting, emotionally open woman and decided she would make a manageable obstacle. She was wrong about that. But the damage she caused while being wrong about it was catastrophic. From the moment Diana moved into Clarence's house after the engagement was announced in 1981, Camilla was already working. A letter appeared on Diana's bed almost immediately after she arrived. It was from Camilla. Warm. Friendly. The handwriting of a woman who wanted to establish something quickly. Such exciting news, it said. Do let's have lunch soon. Diana went to that lunch. She described it afterward in private recordings as very tricky indeed. During it, Camilla asked Diana whether she planned to hunt at Highgrove. A simple social question on the surface. But Diana understood what was really being asked. Camilla was mapping territory. She was identifying which parts of Charles's life she intended to remain in. She was establishing, before the wedding had even happened, that Diana's arrival did not mean her own departure. The years that followed were a systematic unraveling of a young woman who had entered that marriage with genuine feeling and genuine hope. Charles told Diana repeatedly that the affair was in the past. He looked at her and said it. He said it while continuing to see Camilla. He said it while Charles and Camilla were still calling each other, still making arrangements, still using Annabelle's house in Dorset as their meeting point. Diana developed severe eating disorders. She harmed herself. She spent years being told by the people around her that she was unstable, that her perceptions were unreliable, that she was too emotional to be taken seriously. She was being made to doubt her own mind. She was being told that what she could clearly see was not real. That what she could clearly feel was an overreaction. That has a name. That process has a very specific clinical name. And it was done to her deliberately. Over years. With full knowledge of the damage it was causing. William saw it. He was a child in that house and he saw it and he could not stop it and he could not explain it and he did not yet have the words for what he was watching. All he knew was that his mother was disappearing and the people responsible for it were continuing on as if nothing was happening. Then Diana was gone. August 1997. William was 15 years old. There was no grief counseling. No quiet period of private mourning. 6 days after Diana died, William and Harry were placed in a funeral procession and required to walk behind their mother's coffin through the streets of London. In front of cameras. In front of crowds. In front of the entire watching world. William was 15. He walked every step of that route in complete silence. He held himself together with a discipline that no 15-year-old should ever have to find inside themselves. And he remembered everything. Every face. Every moment. Every person who had played a role in getting them all to that street on that morning. During those years, the two boys had private names for Camilla. They called her Lady Macbeth. They called her Cruella de Vil. They called her the Wicked Witch of the West. People have always described those as the harmless labels of grieving teenagers lashing out at the most obvious target. But that reading misses something important. Those are not random insults. Those are not names chosen carelessly. Lady Macbeth is a woman who smiles while orchestrating damage and feels no guilt about it. Cruella de Vil is a woman who pursues what she wants without regard for who gets destroyed in the process. The Wicked Witch is a woman who holds power over people who cannot protect themselves. The boys picked those names because they fit. Because even as children, even without the full picture, they understood the shape of what they were dealing with. William carried all of it into adulthood. He built a life. He found Kate. He created something stable and real and his own. He learned to function around the weight of everything he was carrying. He got very good at appearing composed. But the weight never left. And just as William had found his footing, just as he had begun to position himself to finally do something about the history he had been living inside for 3 decades, one man walked back into the frame. The man who had been married to Camilla when all of it began. The man who, at 86 years old, was still showing up. Still being photographed. Still bringing the entire buried history of this story back to the surface every single time he appeared in public. Andrew Parker Bowles. February 2026. A military memorial. Cameras present. Andrew Parker Bowles standing calmly alongside Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, Camilla's own children. Photographed. Documented. Distributed to every major outlet covering the royal family. And just like that, the whole story was visible again. Andrew Parker Bowles met Camilla in the late 1960s through his younger brother Simon, who worked for her father's business. Their relationship moved in circles for years, on and off, never quite resolving itself. During one of those off periods, Camilla met Charles. Andrew, meanwhile, found himself briefly involved with Princess Anne. That relationship could never become a marriage. Andrew was Catholic, and, as a senior royal, was bound by entirely different rules. The door closed. By 1973, Andrew and Camilla were back together. Their engagement was announced in the Times without any apparent prior arrangement between them, which effectively forced Andrew's hand. They married that same year in what the papers called the Society Wedding of the Year. 800 guests. Princess Anne attended. So did Princess Margaret. So did the Queen Mother. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of a life most people could only dream about. Underneath, it was already coming apart. Within a few years of the wedding, both Andrew and Camilla had returned to their separate habits. Andrew worked his way through a string of relationships outside the marriage that genuinely shocked people who witnessed how openly he operated. The women he pursued were not strangers picked up at a distance. They were Camilla's own friends. The people who sat at her dinner table. The women she trusted. One of those friends eventually confronted him directly. She looked him in the face and said, "I am really hurt, Andrew. I am the only one of Camilla's friends you haven't made a pass at. What is wrong with me?" That is the level of openness he operated with. And nobody stopped it. Nobody said the thing that needed to be said. Because Andrew Parker Bowles was not just anyone. He was well connected. He was well regarded in military circles. And the future of everyone in that social world depended on maintaining a very particular kind of composure. Camilla went back to Charles. Charles had started writing to her within 6 months of the wedding. He gradually began appearing at the Parker Bowles home on weekends. Andrew became accustomed to walking into his own living room and finding the Prince of Wales sitting in it. His friends were horrified on his behalf. They felt he was allowing himself to be treated without dignity, and they were not wrong. But Andrew understood something his friends perhaps did not. You did not tell the future King of England to leave your house. There was no version of that conversation that ended well for Andrew Parker Bowles. So Charles got comfortable. Then he got careless. Then he stopped making any effort to hide what he considered his. In 1980, he invited Camilla as his official escort to Zimbabwe's independence celebrations. Andrew was somewhere in the same orbit, expected to say nothing and to be grateful for the privilege of remaining in it. Then came the Polo Club ball in Cirencester. In front of a room full of guests, in plain view of everyone standing around them, Charles reached his hand into the front of Camilla's dress. Openly. Without hesitation. Without the faintest concern for how it looked or what it communicated. The room froze. People looked at each other and then looked away because there was nothing else to do when the man standing in front of you was the heir to the British throne. Andrew Parker Bowles was in that room. He had ridden in the Grand National. He had commanded cavalry squadrons. He had served his country with a distinguished career that most men would have been proud to carry for a lifetime. And he stood in his own social circle that night and said nothing. Did nothing. He simply stood there and absorbed it. He became known after that in certain circles by a description that followed him for the rest of his life. He was called the man who laid down his wife for the prince. And while that phrase sounds cruel, the people who used it were not trying to be unkind. They were simply naming what they had seen. But here is what most people missed when they watched Andrew Parker Bowles continue to appear at royal events after the marriage ended. Here is what they missed when he attended Charles and Camilla's 2005 wedding and sat through it without visible anger. What they missed when he attended the 2023 coronation and watched the woman who had upended his marriage be crowned Queen of England. What they missed when he was photographed warmly alongside Tom and Laura in January 2026 as if none of the history between them had ever taken place. His presence was not forgiveness. It was a performance. Every single one of those appearances was a carefully managed gift to Camilla's public image. Because Andrew Parker Bowles was the one person on earth who had the moral authority to stand up and say plainly what had been done. He was the wronged husband. He was the man the public would have believed and sympathized with immediately. If he had spoken, it would have ended the rehabilitation campaign before it ever truly began. Instead, he smiled. He showed up. He stood beside her children. He attended her ceremonies. And every time he did, the watching world received the same silent message. If the man she hurt the most has moved on, perhaps you should too. That message had been worth more to Camilla's image than any press release her team could ever have constructed. But now at 86, his continued appearances were no longer serving the purpose they once had. Because now the story had shifted. Now William had already made his move against Annabelle. Now the public was connecting dots they had never been encouraged to connect before. And every time Andrew Parker Bowles appeared in a photograph, every time he stood calmly in front of a camera, he was inadvertently pulling the entire buried history back into the light. The open marriage. The covered affair. Annabelle's house. The network of people who had managed the situation for decades. All of it visible again. All of it connected. And William was watching every single move. Which brings us to the thing that changed his calculation entirely. The thing that took this from a quiet historical grievance and turned it into something immediate. Something current. Something that William was no longer willing to simply observe from a distance. Camilla went after Kate. That was the line. That was the moment when 30 years of controlled patience met something William had absolutely no tolerance for. Because William loves Kate with a fierceness that people close to him have described for years as one of the defining facts of who he is. She is the one person in his life he has made clear he will not allow anyone to touch. Not with cruelty. Not with rumor. Not with the kind of subtle, slow-burning manipulation that Camilla had been practicing since before William was old enough to recognize it. Camilla knew this. She had known it for years. And she pushed anyway. Camilla's team planted the story that Meghan had made Kate cry during preparations for the royal wedding. Harry and Meghan both described that story as completely false. But it did not matter whether it was true. It dominated international headlines. It permanently shaped how the public perceived Meghan. And Kate's name was attached to it in a way that served Camilla's broader campaign to manage the narrative around the people she saw as threats or complications. When William found out, he called Charles directly. Harry was present and recorded what William said. "Give her an inch, they take a mile. They have done this to me for the last time." Then William looked at his father and asked him directly how he could allow a stranger to do this to his own sons. Charles exploded. He defended Camilla. He told William he was paranoid. He chose her over his son in that room the same way he had chosen her over everything else his entire life. It was the same pattern. The exact same one William had been living inside since he was a child. Charles choosing Camilla. Every single time. Without hesitation. Without pause. Without a single moment of genuine consideration for what it cost the people around him. But William was not a child anymore. And he was no longer without options. By late 2025, the tension between Camilla and Kate inside the palace had become impossible to manage quietly. A source told the press directly that Camilla was territorial and increasingly frustrated by the belief that Kate could operate without answering to her. Behind closed doors, Camilla had been vocal about wanting Charles to remain king for as long as possible. The reason required no deep analysis. When William becomes king, Kate becomes queen. Camilla loses everything she spent decades engineering. Her funding, her status, her access, her centrality. The entire structure she had built her life inside simply dissolves the moment the transition happens. So she did what she had always done. She made things difficult. She applied pressure in the places she thought would not be noticed. She treated Kate the way she had always treated women she saw as standing between herself and what she wanted. Then came September 2025. The moment the whole world watched without fully understanding what they were seeing. President Trump and Melania arrived at Windsor Castle for a state visit. The British royal family was assembled to greet them. William and Kate met the Trumps first. Kate fell naturally into warm conversation with Melania. The kind of effortless, genuine connection that Kate tends to create without effort. Then Camilla arrived. On camera. In front of a visiting head of state. In front of journalists. In front of every lens pointed at that room. Camilla swept her hand toward Kate in a sharp, dismissive gesture. Move. Kate, trained by years of navigating this environment, stepped aside. She moved away from Melania and gave Camilla the space she was demanding. The future Queen of England waved aside. At a formal state occasion. In front of the world. William watched it happen in real time. He was standing right there. A source close to the palace said afterward that what Camilla had done was out of line and had deeply upset William. That her public disrespect for his wife was pushing their relationship past any point of manageable tension. Then watch what William did next. At that same event, when the moment came to greet Camilla as protocol required, William gave her 2 brief kisses on the cheek and moved on. To an outsider that sounds entirely normal. But in the world William operates in, where every gesture carries deliberate meaning and every deviation from expected protocol is noticed and recorded and analyzed, what he did was a very loud statement. When a senior royal of Camilla's position is present, William would traditionally bow his head. A formal, visible acknowledgement of her standing. He did not do it. He gave her the kind of greeting you would offer a distant acquaintance at a social event you both happened to attend and walked away. The palace noticed. The press noticed. And Camilla, who has spent her entire life reading rooms and decoding signals, noticed most of all. Royal expert Christopher Anderson confirmed publicly what people inside the palace had known for some time. William simply tolerates Camilla. And Camilla, Anderson said, has always been a little afraid of William. She was afraid of him when he was a 15-year-old boy with no power and no ability to act on any of it. She was afraid of him when he was a grieving young man walking behind his mother's coffin in front of the world. She was afraid of him because even then, even without a single formal authority to his name, there was something in his eyes that told her he remembered everything and that the remembering was not going away. Now he controls the Duchy of Cornwall. He controls the payroll. He controls who benefits from proximity to the crown and who does not. He has already demonstrated, calmly and without fanfare, exactly what he is capable of doing to people who believed their position was permanent. And Kate had just been waved aside on camera in front of the entire world. William had seen enough. Late February 2026. A legal document. Filed quietly. No announcement. No press release. No explanation offered to anyone outside the immediate circle of people who needed to know. Queen Camilla had transferred Ray Mill House to her children. Ray Mill House is a private estate in Wiltshire. Camilla purchased it in 1996 using settlement money from her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles. She paid £850,000 for it. Over the years it became the one place she described as entirely her own. She grew vegetables there. She retreated there when the pressure of royal life became too much. She described the garden as the best kind of therapy she knew. In a life defined by performance and obligation and the constant management of public perception, Ray Mill House was the one space that belonged only to her. And she just moved it out of her own name. On the surface, the explanation writes itself. Camilla is 78 years old. Charles is 77 and fighting cancer. Transferring property to your children under those circumstances is entirely sensible estate planning. Most people presented with that explanation would accept it and move on. But most people had not been watching what William just did to Annabelle Elliot. Think about the sequence. William inherits the Duchy of Cornwall. He reviews the payroll. He finds Annabelle's name on it. He says 4 quiet words and then waits. The 2024 annual report comes out and Annabelle Elliot is simply gone. 20 years of payments. 1 word. No explanation offered. Camilla saw that. She understood immediately what it meant. If William could erase Annabelle from the institution that quietly and that completely, with no public moment of confrontation, no opportunity for defense or appeal, just a decision made in a room and a line removed from a document, then she knew what he was capable of reaching for when the time came. Ray Mill House was her answer. She was protecting her most personal asset before William had the formal authority to threaten it. She was moving it legally beyond his reach before the transition happened. Because once William becomes king, the financial architecture around Camilla changes entirely. Camilla does not receive a separate personal income from the state. She is funded through the sovereign grant, which is the annual payment made to the royal institution by the government. That grant is controlled by the monarch. When William becomes king, it answers to him. Every pound, every arrangement, every comfortable assumption that has been operating for years under Charles's protection. William has already spoken openly about his vision for the monarchy going forward. Leaner, stricter, fewer people benefiting from royal proximity simply because of who they happen to know. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez have never held any formal role within the royal family. Their closeness to the crown has opened doors and created social advantages that money alone cannot buy. Under what William has described as his approach, even those advantages may simply cease to exist. And then there was Christmas. December 2025. Camilla personally called Tom and asked him to come to Sandringham for the holiday. She told him directly that she would love to have him there. That it had been too long since they had spent Christmas together. She was not making a casual suggestion. She was asking her son to come home. Tom's answer became public shortly after. He was not going to Sandringham. Neither was Laura. They had agreed on an alternating arrangement. 1 year with the royal family. 1 year without. That was the year without. Tom Parker Bowles spent that Christmas on the sofa at his former wife's home. The Queen of England asked her son to come for Christmas. He said no. He chose his ex-wife's sofa over Sandringham. And then he let that become public knowledge. Her own children are repositioning. They can sense the shift in the atmosphere. They can feel what is coming even if they cannot name it precisely. They are quietly placing distance between themselves and the machinery that is about to change hands. They are making moves that suggest they understand that the protection their mother has enjoyed is not permanent and that the man who is about to become king has not forgotten a single thing. Camilla got the coronation. She stood in Westminster Abbey in May 2023 and had a crown placed on her head. She got the title. She got the ceremony. She got everything that the public had protested against, everything that had seemed impossible for decades, everything that Diana's presence in the national memory had made feel almost unreachable. She got all of it. And now the man she has always been afraid of is standing directly in her path. Not emotionally. Not reactively. Not out of grief or anger or the wounded impulse of a son who never got justice for his mother. William is none of those things right now. He is something far more dangerous than any of that. He is patient. He is precise. He is working from a position of genuine institutional power for the first time in his life. And he is not in a hurry. Royal expert Christopher Anderson said it plainly. William tolerates Camilla. Not respects. Not loves. Not values. Tolerates. And people inside the palace have confirmed that she appears more